My parents instructed my brother to claim my house since I lack a family. Finish the narrative sections 1 through 3. My parents instructed my brother to claim my house since I lack a family. I am a man in my early 30s, navigating life on my own. I have a brother who is 29 years old, and he already has 4 children. He experienced his first at 22, with the second arriving just a year later. Subsequently, the third occurred 2 years later. The fourth is the newest addition, having arrived just a couple of months ago. My relationship with his wife is strained. She often attempts to provoke me with her air of superiority, and if I respond in any manner, she quickly transforms into a dramatic self-victim. She has the ability to shed tears at a moment's notice and can craft an incredibly persuasive performance to elicit sympathy from nearly anyone. My parents and brother completely cherish her, fully aware of her true nature yet choosing to overlook it. She possesses striking beauty. I must acknowledge that. However, her demeanor is such that I find it impossible to feel any attraction towards her. She stubbornly declines to seek employment, despite holding a college degree, while my mother generously assists with the children throughout the day. Their financial situation hinges completely on my brother. This implies that their only option for housing is my parents' home. Privacy poses a challenge when everyone is gathered under one roof in a 3-bedroom house constructed in the 1960s. During my childhood, it was clear that my younger brother held the title of the favorite. There is a 3-year age difference between us. However, he cultivated a sense of superiority, as I faced severe consequences for responding to his antics in any manner during that time. It was clear that my parents had a much deeper affection for him, as he consistently received the majority of everything unless someone pointed it out. That did occur quite often with other family members. That's the reason my parents decided to pack us all up and relocate about 150 miles from them. They typically visited us only during holidays, as it was a 3-hour drive. My brother has been physically abusive towards me on several occasions. I pursued my first girlfriend with such fervor that it ultimately led to our breakup, and she found amusement in my misfortunes. My parents would simply tell me to toughen up whenever I expressed my feelings about it. Equal treatment was only afforded to me when my parents aimed to maintain a certain image. I must confess, it was quite amusing to witness the expressions on their faces whenever they were compelled to treat me the same as my brother during birthdays and Christmas, especially with others around. We had relatives who were quite inquisitive and had a penchant for indulging in dramatic gossip. My parents tried hard to conceal the truth and warned me that if I spoke out, they would take everything I owned. In fact, it only intensified my parents' celebrations when I reached 18 and left home, as it signified their newfound freedom from financial responsibility. I had yet to complete high school when I made that move. Couch surfing proved to be a much more favorable option than residing with them. Since leaving home, I have maintained minimal contact. They didn't even attend my high school graduation. However, it truly didn't matter to me. After that, I typically encountered my parents and brother only during holidays, just like the rest of the family. The onset of the 2020 pandemic proved to be quite challenging for me. I found myself without a job and unable to renew the lease on the condo, as my roommate also faced job loss, leaving us both reliant on unemployment benefits that weren't enough to cover our living expenses. I had a deep affection for that rented 2-bedroom condo. With the lease coming to a close, my roommate departed ahead of time to return to live with family. I found myself in a position where I had to part with almost everything I owned, as the threat of homelessness loomed if I didn't drastically reduce my belongings. I truly regret choosing to rent such an expensive place. However, I enjoyed embracing the luxurious lifestyle. Before that, life had not shown me any kindness. I came to the understanding that I ought to have chosen a place with a lower cost of living, allowing me to save more for future security. However, I had a strategy in mind. I possess a truck purely because of my enduring passion for them. I discovered a $1,000 camper in decent condition and loaded it onto my truck to experience living out of it for a time. What was meant to be a brief arrangement turned into an unexpected long-term situation that I never anticipated. I initially envisioned living in the camper at my parents' house, where my brother and his family continue to stay. When I approached my parents about staying for a bit, they informed me that their house was already full and they preferred I not be there. Additionally, our relationship over the past 10 years has been far from harmonious. They mentioned that they would only allow me to park my camper there if I paid them nearly the equivalent of renting an apartment in my area. That was an excessive hassle just to park my camper. I found myself without a job, diligently working to conserve every bit of my unemployment funds until I could secure new employment. The rent they were asking feels like I might as well be living in an apartment. My parents reached out to me in eyesore and suggested I take a hike since we couldn't find common ground. And I still found it utterly amusing that I had to reside in a camper. My brother joined her in ridiculing me, pointing and calling me a homeless bum. I parked my truck and camper in a store parking lot, seeking refuge for the night when I had nowhere else to turn. A wave of fear washed over me at the thought of someone attempting to break in. It's safe to say that my sleep was far from restful that night. There was no other place for me to turn, as the relatives who owned homes lived quite a distance away, and all my friends were residents of apartments. I felt a strong connection to my surroundings, which made the idea of leaving quite difficult for me. I had arranged for my mail to be sent to a friend's apartment. It was the sole method through which I could continue receiving my mail. Securing a reliable parking spot proved to be quite a challenge. I set out on a quest to discover a position akin to my previous role. Months were spent embracing the nomadic camper lifestyle. During that period, I faced numerous challenges. All sorts of individuals, from those in need to those asserting I should depart due to my camper being an eyesore. At one point, an individual who instructed me to relocate asserted that they were affiliated with a homeowners association. I wasn't even stationed on a road lined with residences. When I inquired about the HOA, they became extremely aggressive and issued threats towards me. I decided to relocate my camper to sidestep any potential issues. To ensure a consistent flow of electricity, I discovered the utility of a long extension cord, allowing me to connect and recharge my camper batteries wherever possible. This involved stealthily maneuvering and connecting it to an external outlet of an unfamiliar building while stationed on the street. I understand that it may not be the most honorable choice, but I needed to ensure my batteries were charged to keep my refrigerator functioning properly. I possessed a compact solar power bank for charging my phone, yet I lacked any form of generator. Generators tend to be quite loud and also need fuel to operate. I took the necessary steps to fulfill my obligations. After months of enduring that lifestyle, I finally secured a new job. I relocated to the nearby city in search of employment that steered clear of the retail sector. During my college years, I experienced the world of retail and vowed to myself that I would never return to it. Even though I was on the verge of breaking that promise, I was still receiving unemployment funds. However, I lacked a consistent residence during that time. I was determined not to be without a job when it came to an end. Additionally, I found myself utterly lacking in stimulation. My time was mostly consumed by reading, watching films on a compact DVD player, using my phone, and meticulously noting down potential parking spots and accessible public restrooms. I found myself feeling a bit envious of the Japanese tradition of public bathhouses. It would be incredibly beneficial to have things like that in this area. Upon securing my new job, I found myself spending most of my time in the back lot of the building, nestled among the old employee parking spaces. These spots, seemingly abandoned by everyone else, were so far back that the area felt almost forgotten. My boss, the owner of the company, appreciated this setup since I was eager to take on any shift available, provided I had sufficient rest. He even allowed me to detach the camper from my truck and set it up in one of the spaces, giving me the freedom to drive around without it. I'm not entirely certain about the legality of this, yet it seemed that no one raised any concerns. During my time living there, I rarely encountered trespassers. A handful remained, but the security personnel promptly escorted them away. I found myself available almost constantly whenever they required my assistance, and I was engaged in work nearly every day of the week. My boss allowed me to connect my camper to the building for power and water, and in exchange, I contributed a small amount of rent by volunteering my time on Sundays when the office was quiet, with only the janitor and security guard present. The yawn I often experienced while showering at a friend's apartment or my local gym, since the camper lacked a shower and only provided a portable toilet, which I was reluctant to fill due to the unpleasant task of emptying it. Thus, I sought out other bathrooms whenever possible. I possessed a key to the warehouse, granting me access to the bathroom at any hour I desired. I had developed a familiarity with the night security guard, even addressing him by his first name. He has since evolved into one of my dearest companions. Heating the camper in winter was a breeze with a compact electric heater. Summers lacked enjoyment, however. The camper lacked air conditioning, prompting me to acquire a second-hand portable unit to ensure some level of comfort. I earned a significant amount of overtime pay and gained practical experience by learning new skills from my colleagues. Midway through this year, I secured a more advantageous position in the company as a supervisor, resulting in a salary that surpassed my previous job. At that moment, I realized my desire for a home. The fright I experienced from losing my condo opened my eyes to the necessity of securing something far more stable for the long haul. As I surveyed my surroundings for a place near my job, I stumbled upon a 3-bedroom manufactured home situated on a quaint little property, just 2 miles away. However, I successfully negotiated it down to $10,000 below the asking price. I invested almost all of my savings for a down payment and received approval for a home loan. I have finally moved on from living in a camper. I found ample room to maneuver my truck behind the house, allowing me to detach the camper and prepare it for setup in the backyard. I placed it there as a separate entity, just in case I decide to utilize it once more. Once I had completely settled into the house, I foolishly boasted about it on my social media. My family noticed the post. And that's where this journey truly begins. After a few weeks, my parents and brother, accompanied by his family, arrived for a visit, completely unannounced, eager to tour my home. I never provided them with my address. I remain puzzled about how they discovered my address. None of my friends have come forward, and no family members had visited me before that time. I can't help but think they might have been watching me at work and then trailed me home or something like that. I wouldn't be surprised at all. As soon as I opened the door, they surged in like eager tourists, full of energy and excitement. Then they began to settle in comfortably. They continued to poke around, and Cassandra kept giving me this unsettling smirk that she flashed repeatedly. Eventually, I came to understand the reason behind it all. It infuriated me beyond measure, like a raging bull that had just been provoked by a hornet's sting. My parents often remarked on the abundance of space I have now. And it's overwhelming for someone like me who has no spouse or children. My brother kept commenting on how there was more room than in our parents' house. Additionally, my home was nearer to his workplace as well. Warning signs everywhere, I'm aware. At last, my brother requested a moment for a private conversation. Suddenly, the room was empty as everyone made their way out onto the front porch. That was the moment I understood they had orchestrated something. My brother mentioned that the house might be overwhelming for me to handle on my own, and I ought to allow him to move in with his family since his wife is expecting their fourth child. My home is significantly nearer to his workplace. He mentioned that since I already possess the camper, I could simply reside in it outside while they occupy the main house. It's worth noting that Dylan never mentioned anything about offering rent. Keep in mind that he has a solid job. He began to discuss the impending changes, including the possibility of curfews. I realized that I couldn't simply enter at any moment without giving prior notice. Had it not been my brother, I would have assumed the individual I was conversing with had completely lost their sanity. However, Dylan lost his marbles long ago due to our parents treating him as if he were the center of the universe. I attempted to express my thoughts, yet he continued to dominate the conversation as though my voice held no weight. I absolutely refused to rent my house or any part of it to him. Perhaps others, simply to facilitate a smoother path to paying off the mortgage. But certainly not him or his unpleasant spouse. I've come across this very scenario in numerous videos online before. And never once did I believe I would truly experience it, as it seemed utterly absurd to me. However, my parents, brother, and Cassandra all embody the characteristics of a group that is quite self-absorbed and demanding. I grabbed my phone and set it to begin recording. Then simply grasped it tightly. Dylan appeared completely indifferent, as if my actions had gone unnoticed by him. He just sat there, arms flailing, passionately explaining all the reasons he needed my house. Then he shifted from stating that to behaving as if it were already settled, extending his hand to shake mine. That was the moment I truly stood my ground and firmly declined. And I exclaimed it with such intensity that Dylan stumbled backward for a moment. I seldom raised my voice to him like that, as our parents would punish me whenever I did. Yet, this was my home, not theirs. My spine can gleam as much as it desires in this space. I rose to my feet and firmly informed him that my house was not available for anyone's taking. Just pretending that I'll allow him to move in simply because they desire it won't bring that outcome any closer. I purchased my home for myself. It's not my responsibility that he continues to have more children and remains living with our parents due to his inability to afford his own place. Dylan leaned in as near as possible without making contact and declared that I didn't deserve the house. He sought a more suitable home for his family. I chuckled in response and declared that was complete nonsense, as I had put in a lot of effort to purchase my home. Naturally, I earned it. Dylan began to shout that I have neither a wife nor children, and that I don't require all this space. I might as well just hand it over to him. I stated that I won't be providing him with anything. He didn't even bother to offer me any rent. If I allow him to move in, I would still be responsible for the entire mortgage on my own home, all while being unable to actually live in it. Dylan expressed that he believed he shouldn't be responsible for paying rent, prioritizing his family over that obligation. He mentioned that our parents had indicated I would take on this responsibility and that I would indeed follow through. I shouted as though their word held absolute authority, asserting to Dylan that they lacked the right or power to transfer my house to him. Just then, my parents and Cassandra stormed back in through the front door, encircling me in an attempt to coerce my agreement. Conflict erupted in abundance. To summarize, from that moment onward, I heard the phrase "just do it" for Dylan countless times. During the confrontation, I made it clear that they have no authority over my life or my home, and to escape before I contacted the authorities. Cassandra shouted at me with the utmost intensity about her pregnancy once more. I simply cannot put her through this. I stated that I did nothing to her. She seemed to think she could endlessly draw from me, as if I would simply permit it. I felt no duty towards her or her family. Then I referred to her as an arrogant individual who had always shown me a lack of respect. I have no interest in her opinions or the number of children she has. I feel no compassion for her. She will not be residing in my home. That provoked her fury to the point of launching an attack on me. She landed a solid punch on my face and attempted to follow up with more. Yet my brother restrained her, her protests echoing in frantic kicks and shouts. She persistently insisted that he release her, driven by the urge to claw my eyes out. The device in my hand captured nearly every moment. I raised it and declared that I would contact the authorities if they didn't vacate immediately. Dylan was informed by my parents that they were departing. My mother then declared that I had a week to regain my clarity of thought. I informed her that I would not be there and that she should not return. Then I informed Cassandra that my phone had captured everything. Should she attempt anything, I will take legal action for assault. She let out a piercing scream before dramatically exiting, her face buried in her hands as tears streamed down. My mother was the final one to leave, reminding me that I needed to do this for Dylan and Cassandra. I replied that I would not be. Continuation of the narrative. After I expelled my parents, brother, and Cassandra for attempting to coerce me into giving my new house to my brother, I promptly took to my social media to share the story with the family. It disseminated quite rapidly. However, it's no longer accessible since it was deleted a while back, and I've set my profile to private. I shared my thoughts on the matter, anticipating that my family would inevitably attempt to portray me as the antagonist upon their return. And I was precisely correct. However, I had roughly an hour to begin before they arrived. I possessed video evidence that substantiated my account of their actions. Taking the initiative proved effective as I quickly gained the support of several family members. My parents, brother, and Cassandra were likely prepared to craft their own post, but the moment had passed. They hardly made an effort to disguise the truth. My parents, Dylan and Cassandra, had a handful of flying monkeys backing them. But not much more. Many others were well aware of their own entitlement. What transpired was something that everyone swiftly grasped and embraced. One individual, in particular, reached out to me. Unfamiliar voices lashed out at me, declaring that I was a terrible brother and insisting that I step aside for someone who truly embodied the role of a family man. I have just concluded the call and taken the step to block the number. This did not occur again. The week passed, and my parents arrived with Dylan at my front porch, just as they had promised in their earlier ultimatum. They incessantly rang my doorbell and pounded on the door until I finally responded. I cracked it open slightly, and they attempted to force their way in once more. However, I had fitted a couple of latch chains that thwarted it, and I even pressed my body against the door for added security. My father and brother insisted on entering, but I firmly stated that I was documenting everything on camera and would contact the authorities if they attempted to break in once more. My mother soothed them, and then in her most saccharine voice, inquired if I was prepared to allow my brother to move in. I firmly instructed her and the others to leave and not return. My mother feigned sorrow and questioned why I couldn't simply do this for Dylan, my cherished brother. I chuckled and then candidly expressed that I do not regard him as a brother, as he has treated me poorly for years, and they only fueled his behavior. They exhibit poor parenting skills, and he demonstrates a lack of brotherly support. I instructed them to depart immediately or I would have to contact the authorities without delay. They all departed with unexpected ease, save for my mother's piercing sobs and the disapproving glares from the others. It could be argued that their departure was surprisingly effortless. I believed the entire situation had come to a close, yet it seems I underestimated them, as they had more foolish schemes in store. On Friday evening that week, I returned home to discover a moving truck alongside my brother's minivan, both occupying my driveway. Dylan and his family were there, unpacking and arranging their belongings. He greeted me with a mischievous grin and a casual wave when our eyes met. Anger surged within me as I confronted him and his family, demanding they cease their actions. Yet, with a smug demeanor, he retorted that, whether I liked it or not, they were going to move in. In a manner that felt utterly contrived, she tilted her head and puckered her lips, declaring that it was fine, all because my mommy had given her permission. And I should always heed my mother's advice. I simmered with anger just hearing those words and gazing at her self-satisfied, irritating expression. I quickly confined myself and my truck to immediately contact the authorities. As they became aware of my actions, Cassandra began to pound on my window, shouting for me to cease, insisting that I couldn't do this to her since she and Dylan required the house. And she wept, asking why he couldn't simply do this for Dylan. I replied with, "Forget Dylan. This is my house, not his." She then issued a threat to scratch the side of my truck if I didn't cease my calls to the police. The 911 operator was able to hear everything due to the window being slightly ajar. I informed Cassandra that if she were to cause any damage to my truck, I would take legal action against her. She demonstrated her intelligence by choosing to withdraw. Upon the arrival of the police, Dylan and Cassandra, accompanied by their children, had secured themselves within my home. I informed the officers about the incident and presented my new driver's license, which displayed my current address. As we approached my front door, I noticed that the lock had been replaced. The old lock rested on the porch, its center hollowed out by a drill. The drill they employed was positioned right beside it, accompanied by a full set of Harbor Freight drill bits. I indicated the damaged lock and drill. Subsequently, provided the authorities with a detailed account of all the occurrences that transpired beforehand. It seems that Dylan must have reached out to our parents at some time after I got home. They arrived just as I was speaking with the officers. My parents quickly fabricated a story, claiming that I had consented to rent my house to my brother and his family. I stated that was a lie that could be easily proven, one way or another. At last, Dylan and Cassandra emerged from my house, papers in hand. They both wore expressions of sheer smugness, as if they had cleverly outwitted me. They had indeed created and produced a counterfeit rental agreement. However, my signature was absent from it. There existed one, yet it bore no resemblance to my own handwriting. I doubt any of them have truly laid eyes on my signature. That was an astonishingly foolish decision on their part. I informed my parents and Dylan that it was an obvious act of fraud. If the authorities were to look into it, they would undoubtedly uncover the truth. I believe that facing jail and court would not be beneficial for them. It might even cost Dylan his job, the sole source of support for his family. I mentioned that I would seek legal representation and pursue a lawsuit for damages if any of my belongings were lost, stolen, or damaged. Additionally, I would reach out to CPS for added precaution. Dylan's face drained of color, and a look of genuine fear crossed his features when I spoke those words. However, my mother intervened and insisted that I should simply go along with this for Dylan and reside in the camper so they could finally enjoy a family home of their own. I shouted at her, insisting that if she believed it was such a brilliant idea, she should take it upon herself to do it for Dylan and allow him to have the house all to himself. The officers pulled my mother away from me, and I declared that I wanted them all to leave immediately, or I would take legal action. I exclaimed about how they forcibly removed my front door lock to gain entry. The lease documents were clearly counterfeit, with a poorly forged signature, and I have video evidence of Cassandra assaulting me. These are serious offenses that I could use to significantly impact their lives if I chose to. If they chose to stay, that's precisely the course I would take. The sole reason I hadn't done it yet was for Dylan's kids, giving them one opportunity to escape. When my parents heard that, it seemed to finally dawn on them that they couldn't compel me to do it for Dylan. My mother finally relented and declared that she would bring this to a close. She approached Cassandra and engaged her in a soft conversation for a moment, while my father conversed with Dylan. Cassandra erupted into tears, tearing the fake rental papers into shreds and scattering them like confetti. An officer quickly intervened, instructing them to gather the scattered pieces or face a citation for their actions. At this moment, both officers wore expressions that clearly conveyed their feelings of underappreciation for the situation they were facing. Dylan needed to begin instructing his children to pack their belongings back into the moving truck. The children were in tears, with the oldest one wailing about how he wouldn't have his own room anymore. Cassandra and Dylan rounded up their children, attempting one final, feeble effort to evoke sympathy with their sorrowful family display. I truly believe they must have rehearsed it in advance. The children wore identical expressions of desperation, their lips trembling slightly. Cassandra continued to caress her pregnant belly, tilting her head in a way that resembled a forlorn puppy, while my brother wore the most sorrowful expression he could muster and pleaded, "Please don't do this. We must find a way to reside here." Yet I stood firm and instructed them to continue packing. The children and Cassandra escalated their wailing to an unbearable level, and Dylan shouted at me, "Are you satisfied with yourself? You've turned away our chance at a home, driven by a reluctance to share and support family." I found myself laughing uncontrollably and firing back that what he was attempting was taking, not sharing, and no amount of tears would persuade me to allow his family to move in, as he is no longer a brother to me. He's simply a self-centered individual who believes he can seize anything he desires from me, just like he did when we were younger. Dylan began unleashing a torrent of expletives at me until the police intervened, warning him to calm down or face arrest, regardless of whether I chose to file charges. He drew in his lips, his expression a blend of fear and intense anger. I inquired with the officers if they could remain until my parents, brother, and Cassandra had departed, and they responded that they had no plans to leave until the situation was settled. Indeed, within moments, the number of officers doubled from 2 to 4 as additional vehicles arrived for reasons unknown. That provided my parents with a little extra motivation to take action. I insisted that Dylan hand over the keys to the new lock he had installed on my front door. He was quite hesitant to relinquish them. Instead of simply passing them to me, he tossed them down the street and into a storm drain, telling me to retrieve them myself. However, one of the officers reprimanded him for that and ordered him to retrieve them. He had to remove the grate merely to access them. he ended up quite soiled along the way. Upon receiving the keys again, he merely grumbled and forcefully dropped them into my palm. I firmly instructed them to depart and never return. My mother claimed I would be disowned for this, as though that were meant to intimidate me. I expressed that to them. Then, with a heavy dose of sarcasm, I remarked something like, "Oh no. That means I won't be able to join you all for any holidays, where I'm often treated poorly by everyone anyway. Clearly, Dylan has always been your preferred choice. Your treatment of me during my upbringing was so harsh that if Dylan were ever in need of an organ donor, I wouldn't consider helping him at all. So, just do what you always advised me to do when I faced mistreatment from all of you, and endure it." My parents were completely taken aback after I expressed all of that. The quartet of officers cast a rather judgmental gaze in their direction. Let me tell you, if you really want to challenge unpleasant parents like mine, do it in front of the police. Because they probably won't engage in anything particularly foolish afterward. My mother suddenly burst into tears and turned to leave. My father just stood there, his expression suggesting he was on the verge of striking me. Dylan simply embraced his children, a sense of resignation washing over him. Oh, and Cassandra was throwing a fit on my front lawn. Before long, they all lined up, distributing boxes and retrieving their belongings from my home. Everything remained in its boxes, untouched and waiting. Everything was removed in a swift manner. Yet, as I engaged in the task, my mother continually reassured me that it wasn't too late. And I could still accomplish it for Dylan multiple times. Every attempt to negotiate grows increasingly persistent, as if to sway my decision. She mentioned that Dylan might cover my rent if I allowed them to stay. When that plan fell through, she suggested I could return to live with them, allowing Dylan to rent my house so I could avoid sharing the building. I instructed her to be quiet and continue packing boxes, as I prefer not to have Dylan or his family nearby. I have no interest in his money, and the thought of living with him or my parents again is unappealing, especially considering how they treated me during my childhood. Striking a bargain with my parents feels akin to striking a pact with the devil. Cassandra, upon hearing this, erupted into another tantrum and hurled a box to the ground. She plopped down on the ground, indulging in a moment of self-pity, reluctant to return to the shared confines of my parents' house. She sat there, her expression a portrait of anger. Remained there in solitude until the others had completed their tasks. She felt no desire to rise when the moment to depart arrived. They successfully moved all their belongings from the house and loaded them into the truck. Before they departed, I unleashed my frustrations on my parents one final time regarding all the challenges they subjected me to during my upbringing. Despite the presence of 4 officers, they seemed unable to intervene, merely standing by and observing the situation unfold. I confronted them about numerous incidents that occurred. They even highlighted how they were unable to simply do something kind for me. It was like allowing me to stay with my camper during a time when I was without a home, striving to regain my stability. It's astonishing how Dylan and Cassandra were allowed to mock me and label me a bum. Well, who finds themselves in a less than favorable position now? They aimed to evict me from my own home so Dylan could reside there without paying a dime. However, when I found myself in need of a place to stay, they sought to charge me an exorbitant fee for parking my camper, fully aware of my unemployment situation. The cops shot me even more intensely judgmental looks after I said all of that. I confronted my parents once again, questioning what I had ever done, aside from simply being born, to warrant such mistreatment. It seems that whenever I achieve a measure of success, there are those who wish to take it from me, favoring their preferred child instead. It's as if they would rather I sacrifice everything for Dylan, leaving me with nothing of my own. I purchased my home with the funds I earned. I had no obligations to them. I will not seek anything from them again. It seems evident that I will always be perceived as nothing more than a doormat or a source of income in their perspective. I received no responses from them. They remained frozen in place, appearing utterly out of their element. I persisted in my tirade, questioning what on earth led them to believe they were exemplary parents after everything that had transpired. My father was flushed, but it was more from humiliation than fury this time. My mother wept, lamenting that she was a terrible person. I candidly acknowledged that she is a truly terrible person. They certainly are, and I wouldn't be surprised if they face dire consequences for it as well. They were terrible individuals, and they were all aware of it. However, had I addressed these issues privately rather than publicly, they would likely have become upset with me and continued to perceive me as the one at fault. Their prolonged denial had woven itself into the very fabric of their identity. My mother pressed her face into my father's jacket, letting her tears flow freely. My father appeared more defeated than I had ever witnessed before. Dylan and his family completely disregarded my presence as they wrapped up the task of loading everything into the moving truck. I ensured that none of my belongings were taken. I hadn't really had the opportunity to acquire much furniture so far. They all returned to their vehicles, their eyes fixed on me with a lingering malice, until my brother finally persuaded her to drive the minivan home. Once they had all left, I returned to the online world and revealed everything that had transpired. My parents couldn't muster the courage to defend their actions this time. Although the family had been somewhat divided prior to this incident, the outcome now overwhelmingly favored me. Almost everyone in the family has taken my side following this event. Those who haven't chosen a side are merely remaining neutral. Regardless of how often my parents attempted to use the "we did it for Dylan" excuse, it fell on deaf ears. Thus, all the familial support they once had is now completely absent. Several family members whom I anticipated would not support me actually did. That encompasses the previous flying monkeys. It seems they've reached their limit at last. During that period, I extended an invitation to host half the family at my new house for Christmas Eve. My parents did not receive an invitation. Surprisingly, I found that I wasn't blocked on my brother's and Cassandra's profile. I noticed that Cassandra welcomed her fourth baby in early November. They continue to reside with my parents. I have a strong feeling they were aware of my gaze. Cassandra continued to share passive-aggressive posts every few weeks about feeling cramped while living with my parents. Perhaps to determine if she can still evoke feelings of guilt in me. I'm certain it's testing my parents' patience, as they find themselves lacking any peace and quiet in their golden years, surrounded by 3 boisterous and unruly children. A house filled with a mentally unstable Cassandra, my golden child brother, and a newborn baby all at once. Maybe they could set up a camper in their own backyard and allow Dylan to take full control of their house. Perhaps they will finally find some tranquility. Indeed, that option is available for Dylan. Continuation of the narrative. To those who insisted that I should have simply allowed my brother and Cassandra to rest, claiming that my hesitation stemmed solely from their roles as parents. Their children depend on them. Should Dylan find himself in handcuffs, it would probably mean the end of his employment. Without that, his family is left with no financial support. Cassandra currently has a baby who is just a few months old. There's no reason for either of them to find themselves behind bars. However, revenge doesn't require imprisonment. Indeed, the police can provide assistance. However, I achieved retribution without involving law enforcement. Will I ever show such mercy again? It's highly improbable. They are fully aware of it. I chose to hold off on creating an account and sharing anything until after the new year, just in case more developments occurred. Indeed, it happened. As past readers are aware, my Cassandra has been crafting passive-aggressive posts on social media that are clearly aimed at me. This behavior became particularly noticeable following Cassandra's fourth baby in November. She kept sharing the same tiresome drivel repeatedly. She merely discovered somewhat clever methods of rephrasing it. However, she consistently expressed her exhaustion with living under my parents' roof. There simply isn't enough room. She requires a place to call her own. Words, words, words. I realize I may come across as dismissive. But experience what I have with these individuals, and you'd be inclined to mockingly play tiny violins in their presence as well. They are simply that terrible. And because I delayed creating an account until January, more unfolded just as I anticipated. Previously, I mentioned that I had invited half of the family to a Christmas Eve gathering at my home. All the people I invited showed up. Despite the journey stretching over a considerable 3 to 4 hours for them. However, they were eager to come and demonstrate their support for me. I received a great deal of praise from them for the effort I put into securing a house on my own, and that they expressed their regret for all that I had endured. I was questioned about why I didn't simply take my camper and make the 3-hour drive back to them, rather than enduring a prolonged period of near homelessness. And I had to reluctantly confess that I was quite fond of living in this area. I found my most promising job prospects in this region. In my hometown, the job market in my field is rather limited. Should there be any? I sought to carve my own path as much as possible. In response, they generally agreed. We transitioned into hosting a rather delightful gathering. It was the finest I had experienced in a long time. Some family members even brought along CDs featuring wonderful Christmas albums. I must admit, the one my uncle brought of Ray Charles truly stood out as my favorite. His rendition of Christmas songs is unparalleled. I've never encountered anyone quite like him. The atmosphere was filled with grandeur and joy. For the first time, I sensed a freedom to let go of my past troubles and truly embrace the present. However, I wouldn't be expressing this if things had remained unchanged. Approximately 2 hours into the gathering, you can guess who made an appearance. My parents, brother, and Cassandra arrived, attempting to wear cheerful expressions. They just barged in without a moment's hesitation. They strolled right through my front door as if it were their rightful place. I turned off the music and instructed them to exit at once. They pleaded to remain, claiming they had brought offerings. Before I could utter another word, one of my uncles rose and shouted at them. He declared that they were unworthy of a place in my home or my life after the chaos they attempted to create months ago. He had the support of several other relatives. Keep in mind, this individual is my uncle. He adored her completely until he discovered the turmoil that existed between me and my parents. My grandparents, despite their age, quickly intervened and told my parents that if they wished to reconcile with me, it was far too soon. They have never felt such disappointment in them as they did this past year. For a considerable time, they had concealed their preference for my brother from the watchful gaze of others. Yet, the deception no longer held sway over anyone. They had to genuinely strive to treat me as a son if they hoped to be part of my life once more. Then they directed their attention to Dylan and Cassandra, expressing their frustration over the incessant drivel Cassandra continues to share. They've had enough and simply want to move on. My house shall not transform into their new abode. Cassandra reverted to her familiar routine of tears, indulging in a pity party over the belief that she deserved to be the one living here instead of me. She would collapse into a chair, throwing a fit, insisting it was unjust that I had this house all to myself while she juggled 4 children who required more room. She yearned for a better environment, one where she could truly embrace the role of a mother. I acknowledged that my actions were small-minded. However, I emphatically highlighted her shortcomings as a mother, as she allows my mother to handle the majority of the parenting while she remains idle, indulging in drinks, scrolling through her phone, or spending all of Dylan's money on outings. And she dares to voice her grievances about it. I even joked that I'm amazed her baby doesn't get tipsy from her breast milk since she consumes so much alcohol. I must confess, I may have crossed a line, as I received some disapproving looks, and Cassandra insisted on knowing if I was implying she was a bad mother. The evidence is clear, and if she aspires to move out of my parents' house in the future, she must utilize her college degree, secure employment, and develop the habit of saving money. My mother already handles the majority of the child care for my brother's kids, so she'd have ample time once her baby grows a bit older. The eldest child of my brother, just 7 years old, rushed over to me, kicking and screaming because I had raised my voice at his mother. He persistently pressed me about how his mother claimed I was the villain who caused her tears and prevented them from living here. In that moment, my brother reached for his son, guiding him away with a firm grip. However, all the other relatives quickly joined in, transforming the situation into a family intervention directed at my Cassandra and brother. She wept. The infant in her arms was wailing softly. The sound of her children's cries filled the air. Even Dylan was on the verge of tears from the relentless verbal assault he was enduring. He found himself perched on the ottoman where I store shoes by the front door, appearing utterly disheveled. He averted his gaze from everyone around him. He was unable to utter even a couple of words to me. Not with an entire house brimming with irate individuals poised to scrutinize him if he dared to unleash his inner golden child once more. Had they not been present to obstruct him, I have a feeling this would have turned into a déjà vu of that time he attempted to boss me around to seize my house months ago. At this stage, he had been so utterly humiliated that the reputation of both him and my parents within the family was entirely shattered, as the masks had all been removed. Shortly after, my parents, brother, and Cassandra departed in a state of defeat. The gathering continued, and we all steered clear of discussing the recent events for the remainder of the night. Given that many of the adults had been drinking, everyone ended up spending the night at my house. I even allowed a few of them to sleep in the camper to ensure there was ample space. I must confess, it serves as a delightful guest house as well. All my relatives were eager for a tour a little sooner, too. They expressed their disbelief that I had been living in it for nearly 2 years. Many inquiries have arisen regarding it, similar to the experiences of summer and winter, and so forth. I woke up before anyone else on Christmas morning. There was a fresh pot of coffee brewing, alongside some ibuprofen to ease the spiked eggnog hangovers that a few of them were nursing. I received praise for being a significantly more gracious host than my parents ever managed to be. And we all came to a consensus to repeat this delightful gathering next Christmas. After Christmas, Cassandra finally ceased making posts that were clearly aimed at me. Additionally, all of the previous ones were removed. However, not long after the new year, she recently shared a post expressing her frustration about her attempts to persuade my parents to purchase a camper similar to mine. It could be arranged in the backyard, allowing Dylan and his family to utilize the entire house as their family home. Experiencing a dose of your own remedy is rarely enjoyable. It seems my parents rejected that idea quite strongly, or so I've heard. No one will force them out of their own home, especially not from their master bedroom. The post lasted just a few days before Cassandra took it down. Since that time, her posts have been few and far between. She has a penchant for voicing her grievances. But if a tree falls and no one is there to hear it, does it still have the capacity to express its grievances? Cassandra seems to have come to the conclusion that there's little value in continuing when her voice goes unheard. Dylan is unable to relocate his family on his salary alone in the near future. If they happen to welcome another child in the coming years, it wouldn't catch me off guard. Since that time, life has become more tranquil for me. I've also extended invitations to friends for an evening of poker. I struggle with poker since I can never seem to recall any details about it. But what does it really matter? We indulge in beer and savor junk food while embracing our carefree silliness. We all indulged in Whoppers from Burger King and embraced the moment in the most authentic way four adult men can when they seek to enjoy a carefree time and get thoroughly intoxicated. I'm considering the idea of exploring the dating scene come summer. Time isn't exactly on my side. I hope that turns out positively. My camper now remains unused in my yard. There were indeed days when I ventured out simply to immerse myself in it. I resided in it for a duration of 2 years. It feels like a place where I truly belong. Perhaps one day I will finally have the chance to utilize it for camping. As if it were destined to happen. I have yet to experience camping. My parents viewed it as a futile endeavor. This would truly be an entirely fresh experience for me.